All right, so Diablo 4 Vessel of Hatred has finally arrived, launching this week. How's it going? Pretty good, I'd say. Mostly good anyway. But is it $40 good? Let's talk about that. Now, I will say overall, people seem to be enjoying the expansion. Many are echoing the sentiment that I shared in last week's video, not because they watched the video, we're just saying similar things, which was that as expected, being a live service game, hey, yeah, Diablo 4 is better today than it was during its initial release. Not too surprising. We have seen loads of patches, 6 whole seasons, and now a full expansion's worth of additions and improvements, and as such, the game has more content, is more fleshed out, and yes, it's simply better. For example, there's nearly twice as many endgame activities. You still have the Nightmare Dungeons, Helltides, Whispers, and World Bosses that you saw at release, but now between all of the seasons, as well as the expansion content, there's also Uber Bosses, these single room boss encounters where you go for target farming uniques and mythics. There's the Pit, which is Diablo 4's version of Greater Rifts, used to upgrade Paragon Glyphs and farm Obels. Infernal Hordes, where you fend off multiple waves of enemies for leveling experience and loads of materials. The new Undercity, this multi-layered dungeon with a timer where you go to get rune words and can target farm gear with certain attributes. The Citadel is the brand new large group dungeon that has some puzzles thrown into the mix beyond just clearing enemies, and this has its own cosmetic rewards and new consumables. And then finally, Realm Walkers, the new season mechanic where you walk a giant dog around until he opens up a portal, and you go in the portal to get these new opals, desirable consumables that, among other things, come with experience buffs. So yeah, we went from having 4 endgame activities at launch to now having 10 of them, each with their own particular reason for doing them. Like beyond all the new stuff that I just mentioned and the reason you're going to them, you still want to run the old endgame activities as well. You're going to want to do Nightmare Dungeons to get your glyph drops and masterworking materials. Helltides give all sorts of materials as well as dropping Obels for the random gear gambling vendor. There's the Whispers, which give loads of gold, but also they'll give you Nightmare Dungeon and Horde keys. And then you have those big world bosses that drop boss farming mats for those uniques as well as runes. In fact, as you can see clearly here with this handy spreadsheet posted on the Diablo 4 subreddit yesterday, every endgame activity has its own strengths and a reason that you will want to do them as you're in the process of leveling your character, leveling through your Paragon board, gearing up, and just powering up in general. So these additions have brought way more variety to the endgame loop than what we originally had, and that has been a welcome improvement. It is just far better than it initially was. Plus, there's all of the new stuff added in this particular expansion. There is the new zone Nahantu, a mostly jungly region with all the expected points of interest, events, strongholds, and dungeons, all loaded with enemies, including some brand new ones as well. There's the new class Spiritborn, like this nature monk that blends, well, nearly every class into one. It also happens to be S tier in the current patch. Go figure, some incentive for people to buy the expansion. We're putting a brand new class in. We got to make sure it's just normal and balanced with all the other classes, right? No, you make sure it's overtuned so people, you at the very least don't want it to be at the bottom of the tier list, so you're going to err on the side of making it a wee bit stronger. Anyways, there are mercenaries, which are more than just AI companions that follow you around. They actually bring some pretty impactful passive perks and the ability to use any of their skills in tandem with yours, which can make for some interesting combinations. The bartering system, which is like Obel's gambling, except you actually see what you're purchasing beforehand. And then there's rune words, which essentially lets you mix up your builds with these new builder-spender combinations that grant you access to other classes' abilities, among having other decently powerful buffs for you to play with. So yeah, Diablo 4 today is better and does have way more content than it did back in June 2023, and for that reason alone, even if you liked the game a little bit, it's as good as it's ever been. This is a great time to return. If you didn't like Diablo 4 at release though, and not just because there weren't enough endgame activities, well, I mean, it is still the same game that it was. It's had improvements and there's more of it here, but it's still baseline Diablo 4. Also, the expansion launch has had some issues, both technical and game related. Let's talk about those after a word from today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Atlas, the development studio who brought you Personas 3, 4, and 5 is back with a new game, Metaphor Ref Fantasia. This takes place in a unique fantasy world where you'll journey alongside companions and set out on adventure as you seek to enter the royal tournament in an attempt to lift a curse brought upon the prince. The game blends open world exploration with a character-driven story, so you'll go on quests, dungeon dive, and hunt for treasure while building relationships, creating bonds, and forming a party with an interesting interesting cast of characters. It features an updated combat system that blends both turn-based and real-time action. There's an expansive world to explore, full of beautiful landscapes, dangerous camps, and distant towns. And there is, of course, character customization via this archetype system, where there's powers that you unlock, letting you pick and combine various job class abilities, skills, and special synthesis attacks. So thank you once again to Atlas for sponsoring today's video. Metaphor Ref Fantasia is available right now on PC and Xbox. There's also a demo available if you want to try it. To learn more and check out the game yourself, go ahead and use the link in the video description below. All right, back to Diablo 4. So things got off to a bit of a rocky start. On October 7th, just a few hours before the game was supposed to go live, they posted a message that said, "We are looking at a small delay for launch due to a small technical issue on our end. We are still expecting A Vessel of Hatred to launch this evening, but we will need some additional time to ensure we have every player start at the exact same time across all platforms." Now, ultimately, the game was up and running just a few hours later than expected. Shortly after 9 p.m. Pacific time, a minor annoyance for anyone who was waiting around to play right at launch. I mean, it would be supremely annoying if you like skipped work that day or didn't go to your classes or just took time off to play the game, right? You want it to launch when it's supposed to launch. As for me, I just went to bed. I woke up bright and early the following morning, jumping in, and there was some like minor rubber banding when loading into certain areas, a problem that we saw at initial release that was here a little bit, but overall it was a fairly smooth experience as far as like live service big updates and launches go. At least it was for me anyways. It wasn't a smooth start for everyone. For the first couple of days, there were quite a few technical issues that we saw cropping up, such as people getting locked out of their expansion purchase. Yes, that's right. There were numerous reports of players who had bought Vessel of Hatred randomly being told that they couldn't play because they didn't own it, when they in fact did. They at least spent the money to own it. Now, fortunately, this looks to have since resolved itself after a tiny patch went live, but if you do happen to get stuck with this issue again in the future, it seems like re-logging was a temporary workaround. There was also quite a few bugs and glitches that we've seen, like enemies having their name come up as missing, and I don't mean like there was just no nameplate. Literally, their name said missing rare name, like above the health bar. Pretty funny. Placeholder icons appearing in the Mount Armor page. I've seen this myself at various spots all throughout the game over the past couple years. The cosmetic preview page bugging out hilariously at times, like what is this? And then we had people reporting apparently that the treasure goblins seem to be bugged, not dropping gear that they should be. And you know what? Actually, come to think of it, I have killed quite a few treasure goblins over the past few days and seemingly not had a lot drop myself, so maybe there's something to that one. And while my play experience technically was fairly smooth, it does appear like the servers were a little bugged for some people throughout the course of Tuesday. People reporting lag spikes, stuttering, and poor performance. Again, I had a tiny bit of like rubber banding initially, but it was pretty much ironed out all told come Wednesday. And lastly, this is a pretty big one. Some people are just straight up hard crashing on a consistent basis. People reporting it happening multiple times every hour. Not really good, right? Now, it seems like this could be a memory leak issue. At least that's what people are saying. Unsure at the moment, and hopefully this gets fixed ASAP. In fact, I do think I saw that they posted recently that they had put a patch live specifically to address this. So hopefully that is ironed out by the time you are watching this video. So those are like some of the technical issues and what went on with launch. Now let's talk about some of the feedback and pain points directly pertaining to the game, its content, and all that, right? So first, we've got the new seasonal event, the Realm Walker. People think it is boring, at least the first part of the event. So if you don't know, basically what happens here is you get a notification that a Realm Walker is showing up, you go to the location, and then this big lumbering creature pops up out of the ground. It's like a giant dog, kind of slowly saunters over to a designated location, and in the process, it spits out a few enemies for you to fight along the way. The problem people have is that those enemies in pretty much all difficulty tiers are dying instantly, because frankly, usually when you're in a difficulty tier, it's because you've reached the point where you can kill everything pretty much instantly. That's like how the difficulty progression has been working here, right? So people are going to this Realm Walker, everything's dying instantly, and then they're just having to follow this thing around for what feels like ages, right? You're mostly left twiddling your thumbs, waiting for the walker to reach its destination, taking the occasional pee break here and there. It appears to have a set travel distance with no way of speeding up for the event's conclusion. One solution would be to just have the walker spawn a set number of enemies, and then once those number die, however long that takes, the walker then drops in place and spawns his portal there. Or just to spawn way more enemies if you want him to be moving a set distance. So there's something for everyone to do the entire way they're following the walker. I think maybe part of the reason that they designed this this way initially was to give people time to show up to the event rather than having a high DPS group drop the walker in 10 seconds and then people miss the portal. But if that's the case, you could just leave the portal up for longer. Sure, people wouldn't get to experience the walker portion, but it seems like people don't really care. I don't know, really hard to say, but yes, people have expressed not loving the realm walkers long walk time. Well, Blizzard has already responded in a post on Reddit. They said, we heard the feedback on it being a bit slow and we'll see what we can do. Next complaint here is the resource of bottlenecking. It is continuing to be a thing. Now, this came up while we were reviewing the game. There were a handful of resources that seemed incredibly hard to find and really would hold up gear progression, but not in the normal way that you would expect. Like, yes, sure, the higher resources might be harder to get, and that's what takes you longer, and you have to do the hard thing to get those hard resources. That's actually just a normal expected part of like end game progression in these games, and it's what's supposed to motivate you to do the different activities. But rather, what's seemed to be the bottleneck is instead the low level things, the things rewarded early in the game from salvaging basic white and blue gear and from picking up the basic resource nodes that you find out in the environment. The iron and hide in particular are bottlenecking a lot of people from progressing their end game gear, which sounds crazy, right? At least that's what we have thought initially. It turns out that besides picking up resources in the Helltides, which you can do easier with the help of Subo pointing them out for you, the current best way to stockpile early game mats are apparently the Whispers. Now, I have not done this enough to confirm myself. I've done Whispers, but I haven't been keeping track of if they were giving me a lot of basic resources. I will check it out later today, though, after reading about this, because yes, reportedly, they're granting massive amounts of early game crafting materials, which should alleviate this problem. So start doing Whisper Quest if you haven't already. And there was a moment in time where Angel Breath was also a big bottleneck, but that has already been patched, with now boss monsters and elites having an increased chance to drop both the bundled herbs as well as the Angel Breath. Now, the next complaint that we've seen cropping up is a bit more subjective, but I've seen it discussed often enough that I wanted to address it, and that is complaints about the expansion story, either that it's just not very good or that it lacked a satisfying conclusion. Now, to that second point, I mean, yeah, of course it lacked a satisfying conclusion. They've got another expansion they're going to release in probably about a year from now, so they're leaving room to continue where the unsatisfying portion of this went off. It's like serial TV shows. It's just how they do this stuff, right? So hey, I'm not surprised there, but generally speaking, how was the story's quality? I don't know, dude. I just don't care about the mainline plots in these sort of games, even a tiny bit. In fact, I was very happy that spamming the escape button happened to work. I'm sorry for all the people who put a lot of work and effort into these things. It varies from game to game, and some games I do care about, but when it comes to ARPGs, the narrative element of it, I'm just checked out. I'm sorry, that's not what I'm there. I'm there for my dopamine hits of waiting for loot drops. Maybe I'll slow down and enjoy the story in this game at some point, but I've not up until this point. So yeah, you know, it's not what I'm here for, so it was a non-issue for me, but there have been enough complaints. People are evidently not happy with this story who were hoping that it was going to deliver a good story. Now, that list of issues and complaints aside, generally it seemed like the expansion has had a fairly positive reception so far, mainly I would expect for the reasons that I mentioned. With over a year of new additions and improvements, the game is in much better shape today. Way more content. There's twice the number of endgame activities, resulting in more variety of locations and things for you to do while you're going through the gearing and powering up process. Plus, there's all that new expansion stuff. There's the new zone. There's the new class to try out. There's the bad story. There's the group dungeon and the new Undercity. And people have also been reportedly liking the ramped up difficulty, with Torment 4 being a serious obstacle. In fact, I've not gotten there myself as of this recording. I'm still working on it. I don't know. My build's not looking too hot. I'm trying to figure it out, okay? But anyway, yeah, there is a lot to like about Diablo 4 right now. Critic reviews have reflected this. Those were averaging around an 8.5 to a 9 out of 10. And the discussions that I've seen online, between reading through the forums, between checking social media, and the YouTube videos that I've watched, it's all been mostly positive as well. It seems at least that the people who were interested enough to come back and purchase the expansion, they are for the most part enjoying it. But how many people is that? That's an interesting question. You know, it's hard to know for sure unless Blizzard comes out and gives us the exact numbers, like we sold X number of things, we saw this many players over the weekend. Unless they come out and say that, we can only guess using a few admittedly imperfect alternatives. But nevertheless, what do those imperfect alternatives say? Well, from what I've seen, it's doing okay, but not phenomenally. SteamDB shows the game peaking at nearly 50,000 concurrent players this week, which is roughly 10,000 above the peak from the last 2 seasons. Not not exactly a ton of new players for what is a full-blown expansion, only seeing a little bump. But force, everyone plays on Battle.net, you idiot. Yeah, totally. Of course, that is without a doubt the case, especially considering the Steam version of Diablo 4 didn't happen until months after the game launched, so anyone who bought it there was either a late arrival or they were purchasing a second copy. I am confident that most of the Diablo 4 PC player base is on Battle.net. I would expect that to be the case for pretty much all of Blizzard games. Battle.net was the only option for decades, and I presume many old school fans of Blizzard titles stuck with that platform, just like I did myself. As I said, though, all we have are these imperfect metrics. This is the data we have to work with and extrapolate from because Blizzard doesn't give us their Battle.net numbers. Also, we've got things like Google Trends, and it paints a similar picture. Search interest in the game over this past week peaked at a similar level to what it had during the Diablo 4 seasons, and this basically falls right in line with the slight bump that we see in the Steam player base as well. This is, as far as trends is concerned, also nowhere near the launch numbers, I should mention. It is but a fraction, like a tenth or 15th of the numbers that the game reached when it initially came out. And I will add that anecdotally, I'm not seeing a fraction of the people on my friends list who were there for Diablo 4's launch returning for this expansion. When D4 first came out, I would easily have like 15, 20, or 30 friends online on my friends list playing the game at any given time, at least for those first few days. Like, it was popping off. But for Vessel of Hatred, I've been seeing like 3 to 5 people tops. Just far few people seem to be coming back. This is entirely anecdotal. Okay, we've established that. Like, this isn't a good sample size to form a basic opinion and conclusion about the number of people coming back to the game. But that in combination with seeing just the slight bump in the Steam player base, with seeing just a slight bump in the Google search trends, nowhere near that of launch, all these things come together, these imperfect sources of information, and it paints a general picture. It does appear at a glance the game doesn't have anywhere near having reached the popularity that it saw at its initial release. Diablo 4 in general looks to have kind of settled into a groove where it's got like this consistent player base of people who do like the game, the same people who are returning every season, and it looks like most of those people, plus a few more, have come back for the Vessel of Hatred expansion, and they've been playing and reporting to enjoy it as well. Now, I myself, I've been playing every day since launch. Obviously, I played through the game when we made that review, so I played like a week and a half ago, and I'm playing again today. This time, I'm leveling up a sorceress. I wanted to make a barb again, but apparently they're just trash tier this season. There are like no good builds for doing anything, so I'm just gonna skip it for now. On the Sorc, I've been progressing through the Torment tiers. I still need to grind out some of my uniques and get greater affixes on all my gear. And so right now, I'm going through the whole process of running that loop of activities, and yeah, I'm enjoying it. Like, the game is just fun and satisfying to play, plain and simple. The moment-to-moment action, clicking the bad guys and watching them go boom. No matter the class, I prefer it on the bar, but no matter the class, it feels good to attack things and move through this world and engage with enemies. I liked it at launch. I like it today. As someone who hasn't been here non-stop since launch for every season, it just feels good to be coming back to double the number of endgame activities. Like, once I finished leveling through the new campaign and that was done, I started running the Nightmare Dungeons to get all my glyphs, as this seems to be like the fastest way to get them to drop as soon as possible. Then whenever I noticed that seasonal Realm Walker pop up, I would go there, getting those new opal consumables to keep the bonus experience rolling, in addition to stacking the potions and the incense. I would run Helltides every so often. They're just generally good for getting basic materials, for getting loot drops, experience, and obols. I would do Whispers whenever I was low on gold, and apparently I should be going there for those low-level mats as well. I'll test this soon. The world bosses, anytime I'd see them, I would go do that. It takes like a minute, so no big deal. Then there's the pit, of course, which is for the glyph leveling, which provides a big boost in power. It also drops obols, loads and loads of obols for the gambling vendor. You got the new infernal hordes, which I hadn't seen prior to playing this expansion, and this is pretty cool. It also gives amazing experience and material drops. Then there's the brand new expansion specific Undercity, which is where I go to farm runes. It is one of the best ways to do that right now outside of the Uber bosses, and there are still a bunch of runes that I need. And then I'll be farming the Uber bosses themselves, specifically for the uniques that I need, looking for uniques with greater affixes. And then when I get the chance, I will be running the Citadel again. I already cleared this in the process of reviewing the game, but I've not yet done it a second time on the live servers. And yeah, I'd like to try it on some of the harder difficulties. But yeah, as we've talked about, there's just so much endgame variety right now, each with its own purpose. Many also feed into each other, with like the keys or access to one activity being rewarded from doing another, which means you've got so many good reasons to be bouncing around between all these things and not just spamming spamming the same one activity over and over again, which at launch, it was pretty much just spamming Nightmare Dungeons nonstop. At least that's what my experience was. It's way different right now. It is way more varied. And then there's the new group dungeon, the Citadel. I think this is one of the best things they've added to the game ever, mainly because it's the first significant piece of content that has a challenge beyond just being a gear check. Like most everything else in this game boils down to, can you deal enough damage and can you not die? And then if both of those things are true, you're just trying to move as fast as possible. Now, you are still blasting through rooms of enemies inside the Citadel, but there are other activities in there that you engage with as well, and that's what I've loved. You got matching puzzles where you got to gather and deliver a correct symbol to some location. You got the pressure plates to open gates and lift barriers that require multiple people to bypass. You've got multiple paths that need to be cleared simultaneously, where half the group goes left, the other half goes right. You do those objectives. You got this impending doom timer keeping you moving. Most of these sections where you split up, you even can't progress until your partners have cleared the objectives on their side, on their branching path. It is this forced teamwork. And then, of course, as you expect, the Citadel has boss fights with a whole range of attacks. You got damage pools and just things to avoid so you don't die. But they've also implemented additional cool things a little bit different, like having to reflect projectiles back to the boss, or having to even split the group up in the middle of the fight to take on different parts of the encounter in different areas. And that whole matching runes thing, sometimes you'll have to do that in the middle of the fight while also dealing with the boss's attack and all of the adds. It's just really, really interesting, and I hope to see way more content like this added to the game. And it doesn't have to be forced group content either. I think they should implement this puzzle solving, these like pressure plates, this sort of figuring out in addition to just the blasting. It's an ARPG. The blasting is the main focus, the combat is the main focus, but mixing it up with other things like they've done in the Citadel, it mixes it up, it adds more variety, and it makes the whole experience a lot more interesting. So I hope they continue to add more and expand upon this in future updates. Also, I will add that I still love Diablo 4's open world, and the fact that it's ever expanding is great. Like, if they keep this up, dude, 5 years from now, this game is going to be absolutely massive in terms of land mass and places to go. I'm guessing this is the closest we are ever going to get to having a world of Diablo, right? So with all of that said, yes, I'm enjoying Diablo 4 right now. I'm having a better time currently than I did running Endgame at release. It's just gotten continuously better, more varied, and more interesting in that regard. I hope they continue to address some of the major pain points specific to this expansion, all those technical issues, the bugs, the crashes, etc., the server issues. I hope they fine-tune the resource bottlenecks that we're seeing, and it's more so than anything in the coming seasons and in whatever the next expansion is going to be. I really hope they lean into and continue adding more varied and interesting content beyond just gear checks. That's what I'm praying for. But I will say, I don't expect, if you didn't like Diablo 4 initially, that this expansion is going to do enough to change your mind. Again, it is still the same game. It's clearly good for a couple weeks of entertainment, and then I will just put it away until the next season that I find enticing comes along. And that's how I expect the future of my experience and time with Diablo 4 to continue to play out. Maybe the next expansion completely blows my mind. I think this expansion is good, but it hasn't been like a total perspective change to the game. Maybe we'll see that in the next expansion. We'll see what happens. But I like Diablo 4 generally. It's just getting better, and I'm happy to play it for a couple weeks at a time. And yeah, there you go. That's all for today. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed. See y'all next time.